We read poetry groaned. Or maybe you look like this. Or maybe your kids look like this when you talk about poetry. A lot of us have this reaction. And why do we have this reaction to poetry? Charlie Brown kind of sums it up. It says, here's Sally. We've been reading poems in school, but I never understand any of them. How am I supposed to know which poems I like? And Charlie Brown says, well, somebody tells you. And I think that's an experience that a lot of us have had. We've been told what poetry to read, and we've read it because we have to, not because we want to. But really, poetry is, it's beautiful language, and it can be a lot of fun, and it can be moving in so many ways. But it all is in how we approach its use in our classrooms. And here's what kids don't like when we talk about poetry: free verse and haiku. And as I was reading in my children's literature book, it says a lot of times teachers don't like poetry either, and it's like poetry is something that they want to get over with. And so they want to pick something easy to teach the kids, to write. And so they pick haiku, because haiku is easy, quote unquote, to teach because, it's a certain amount of syllables in each line. But really, to write a good haiku takes practice, and it's not easy at all. It just seems easy because it's got that simple formula. And so, kids don't like haiku because it is kind of hard, and those kind of poems don't really make sense to them. They also don't like poems that don't rhyme and have any rhythm or sound to them, which is another reason they don't like free verse and haiku, because there's no rhyme and rhythm. Kids like poems that have a rhythm and a beat and make sense to them. And that comes from a lot of the poems, especially nursery rhymes, that they're taught when they're little. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get our poor dog a bone, but when she got there, the cupboard was bare. And I just forgot the end of it. That's horrible. Oh my goodness, that's bad. But it rhymes. It has rhythm. It has some sound that goes with it. That repetition. Okay. They don't like poems about nature. And a lot of that goes along with this next one, because those poems about nature, they don't really relate to. Especially, kind of like historical poems, and those that are about things other than what they're familiar with. Poems that have to do with contemporary life. And they also don't like poems that have visual imagery or figurative language. And that could be because by the time they get there, and they're not just reading the poems to read them, to enjoy them, instead they're having to find the visual imagery or the figurative language. You read a poem, and okay, so now class, here's what I want you to go through and circle all the similes. Or does anybody see any metaphors? And there's no reading the poem just to enjoy the poem. So next part, that could be part of the reason that they don't like poems with visual imagery or figurative language. Okay? So how can we take our kids from that first phase of, oh gosh, poetry, to, yes, we're doing poetry, I love poetry, poetry's awesome? Well, let's look at 3 ways here. Actually 4. First is to use light, humorous verse. Make them, make them laugh, make them giggle. And one of the first people that comes to my mind, and because he was the children's poet extraordinaire when I was a kid, is Shel Silverstein. And here's one of, his poems. I asked for a hot dog with everything on it, and that was my big mistake. 'Cause it came with a parrot, a bee and a bonnet, a wristwatch, a wrench, and a rake. It came with a goldfish, a flag and a fiddle, a frog and a front porch swing, and a mouse and a mask. That's the last time I ask for a hot dog with everything. So it's a fun poem, because that would make kids giggle. Wait, that's not stuff you put on a hot dog. But he said everything on it, and it rhymed, it had rhythm, you can put that expression in there and just have fun with it. In recent years, Jack Prelutsky has kind of overtaken Shel Silverstein as the most popular children's poet, especially with humorous and light verse. So here's a Jack Prelutsky. It says, be glad your nose is on your face. Be glad your nose is on your face, not pasted on some other place. For if it were where it is not, you might dislike your nose a lot. Imagine if your precious nose were sandwiched in between your toes. Well, that clearly would not be a treat, for you'd be forced to smell your feet. Your nose would be a source of dread were it attached atop your head. It soon would drive you to despair, forever tickled by your hair. Within your ear, your nose would be an absolute catastrophe. For when you were obliged to sneeze, your brain would rattle from the breeze. Your nose, instead, through thick and thin, remains between your eyes and chin, not pasted on some other place. Be glad your nose is on your face. And, I mean, the kind of things that, who would ever think of that, putting your nose between your toes? But it's written in such a way that it makes us giggle. And make the kids giggle. They would think that was hysterical. And from here, I mean, you can leapfrog into having maybe them write a poem about what if your ear was someplace else on your body? Or, you know, what if your fingers were someplace else on your body? Or your eyes or anything like that. So to springboard from this idea into another and just let them write poetry for fun. Okay, so using light, humorous verse. That's one way to get students maybe to appreciate poems even better. Another is to read a poem every day, out loud. And just to read it. Kind of like, I know a lot of elementary classrooms still have times when teachers read to their students aloud. You know, starting the day with a poem that's just read for the fun of it. And you can do this in every single classroom discipline. There are poems about math that you can read. There are poems about history, science, social studies, choir, band, drum, art, PE, the whole 9 yards. There's a poem out there that you can read. And just read it, to read it and have fun. You know, read it right after you take roll in the morning. Read it right before lunch. Read it before you go to the bathroom break or whatever. But read a poem every day and read it out loud. And read it as you enjoy it. Make sure it's a poem that you like. I'm going to share a little, this next slide is just part of a verse by Maya Angelou that I like. In the flush of love's light, we dare be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. So that would be something, I taught high school. And that would even be something I would read to my, freshman experience class in college. Because I love the message, I love the words, the way it makes you think, but I wouldn't say, okay, so now what does that poem mean, class? No, I just read it to read it. And then let them think about it. And if they want a copy to see for their own, or to know where I got it or where it came from, so that maybe they can read the poem themselves later, sure, here you go. Just a way to let them know that poetry is not something to dread. Okay? But sometimes even these things won't work. So, and this is where my, this next one is where my 16-year-old son's been drawn into poetry. In fact, he took up poetry as a semester-long course at the high school. And their teacher did a great job of this one, using music. Okay? We don't always think of this, but music is poetry. And I'm talking about the lyrics of music. And you're going to think me crazy, but this next slide is Kelly Clarkson. Yeah. No, it's not. It's Katy Perry. Katy Perry's Roar. Okay. I wanted to use an Eminem one because I like Eminem. Yes, I am crazy. He has some good lyrics, some good stuff. There was just a few too much language in it for me to put up here for you guys. I just didn't feel comfortable doing that, so I chose this instead. But it's a poem, and if we would read this without the music, okay, we can get our students to see that, oh, it is poetry. It's verse. Some of it's free verse. Some of it has rhyme. Some of it has rhythm. Some of it doesn't. Okay. I used to bite my tongue and hold my breath, scared to rock the boat and make a mess. So I sat quietly, agreed politely. I guessed that I forgot I had a choice. I let you push me past the breaking point. I stood for nothing, so I fell for everything. You held me down, but I got up. Already brushing off the dust. You hear my voice. You hear that sound like thunder. Gonna shake the ground. You held me down, but I got up. Get ready, 'cause I've had enough. I see it all. I see it now. I got the eye of the tiger, a fighter, dancing through the fire 'cause I'm a champion, and you're gonna hear me roar. Louder, louder than a lion, 'cause I am a champion, and you're gonna hear me roar. See? It's a poem. And I read it differently than it's sung. But it still makes us realize that this is a song about someone who's been oppressed by something and who's rising above it. Okay? Great way to get students to appreciate the lyric in poetry, and just to appreciate poetry in general by reading song lyrics. And sometimes even maybe you reading his lyric the way I did and say, well, does anybody recognize that? You know, play name that tune with the poem you just read. Okay? So, you know, poetry is nothing to be scared of. Poetry is nothing that we need to shy away from. Poetry is something we need to encourage, because poetry is a way to help us express every single kind of emotion, from silliness to sorrow, desperation and despair to total elation, can all go into poetry. And so the key is to be enthusiastic about poetry yourself. And that means, I mean, if you teach English or language arts and you have a poetry unit, yes, you're going to ask your students to probably to memorize, to analyze, to look for figurative language and all that, but don't make that be all that the poetry unit's about. And as you're working through this program as well, you know, we're approaching this not from really a language arts teacher's perspective, but a librarian's perspective. And imagine covering the walls of a library with poetry, song lyrics, you know, having music playing when people come into the library, that, you know, and with the lyrics rolling at the same time, and talking about, you know, the different kinds of poetry, narrative poetry, figurative poetry, poetry that rhymes, poetry that doesn't rhyme, and just, you know, having poetry be there all the time. I mean, we can have special times when poetry's featured, but you know, there's always a poem of some kind somewhere in the library. I think that would be really cool. We ourselves have to be enthusiastic about it. And I remember my 8th grade English teacher. He did a great job of getting us kind of, you know, into poetry a little more. And yes, we had to memorize poems, but they were poems that we enjoyed. And the way he taught it made us want to memorize them and do well. And one of the ones, well, there's actually 2 that we still all quote a lot, and you know, this is 20 some odd years ago now. And the one I'm going to show you next, I mean, I don't know, maybe we've all memorized it before, but it's Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one, as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy, and wanted wear. And though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And we had to memorize that 2 years actually, 8th grade year, and maybe it was my sophomore year. But that's one of those poems that when we get together, sometimes somebody will spout out one of the lines, and then we'll all start saying it together. Great fun. And it's one of those poems that I love to hear read and talked about. So it's one of those that I'm enthusiastic about. It's one that I would read to a class, to my children, and that kind of stuff. So make sure that you are enthusiastic when you choose poems. You might I love Shel Silverstein. Some of his just cracks me up. Jack Preletzi's good. Maya Angelou's beautiful. Robert Frost, because I just read a lot of Robert Frost. Emily Dickinson, all sorts of poetry. And song lyrics galore. So enjoy poetry and help your students enjoy poetry as well.